and welcome to day 4. We're going to focus first off on climate resilience, which is an issue of enormous intensifying importance as extreme weather events increase and, of course, insurance costs rise. And just to remind you, the whole planet and the travel and tourism sector is going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We're going to have to be increasingly resilient because of the extreme weather intensification. And we're going to have to more radically, I believe, reduce our carbon emissions to deal with the code red climate crisis base issue about saving the planet for humanity. So first of all, we're going to start with my friends at Risklair and Bijan Karjai, the founder of Risklair, whose hotel resilience system is gaining widespread take-up around the world, and with whom we have an SDG 17 agreement to provide support to each other's efforts. I have a few questions for you, and I'm going to run straight into them and look forward to a little bit of a dialogue if we can do on these issues. So question number 1 is, it's the broad question. What is climate resilience in your mind? And is it what UN policy wonks call adaptation, that magic word?
So I see climate resilience as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, disturbances, trends in climate change. And I think, if there is a difference between what the UN calls climate adaptation and climate resilience, is embedded in the definition of resilience, maybe, and that it includes the ability not only to adapt, but to acquire new capabilities, perhaps emerging in a better position, stronger from the struggle, whereas adaptation entails preserving existing resources, right? So
you go with the flow, so to speak.
Yes, yeah. So in resilience, you might focus more on this transformative capabilities to bounce forward and not just withstanding the shock to bounce back to initial conditions, because maybe those initial conditions were not.
So could it equate also to what people are now referring to as regenerative?
Yes, all those terms have their own background and context, and resilience is a very plastic term that's stretched to all kinds of contexts as well. But I think, whatever we call it, adaptation, regeneration, resilience, in terms of climate, this notion of acquiring new capabilities, transforming in the face of a very changing, very dynamic conditions is key.
Okay, that's good. And now perhaps you could say a little bit about how your Risklair and hotel resilience, because I know your biggest focus and most successful area is with hotels. Perhaps you can explain a little bit how the platform works.
Yeah, so our software solutions and services, essentially why we created them is to level the playing field and make them accessible to tourism businesses, the risk analytics, without the large price tag that typically is offered by insurance, reinsurance that only large companies can afford. So our vision in that sense is to transform how tourism businesses build climate resiliency by firstly providing them with software supported property level assessments of their risk, and not just risk, also their resilience and preparedness levels. And in this way, really, we want to make that information available to as large a market as possible, of independent hotels who don't have corporate headquarters behind them, and other types of tourism businesses, even as we move beyond hotels.
So what kind of risks are you talking about, Bijan, and where do you get the data from for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so when you're talking about acute waves like heat waves, heavy downpours, hurricanes, wildfires, that become more and more frequent and intense as climate changes. But also,
so it's extreme weather created
conditions.
events, you would say.
Exactly. But also chronic events like sea level rise. We also are getting into metrics like worsening air quality, population change. We're looking at biodiversity. So not just limiting ourselves to hazards, but also various types of different risks emerging from changing climate.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where do you get the data from for that kind of stuff?
Well, behind our analytics are proprietary algorithms that RiskLayer has. So we've been in the business of modeling risk for many years now. So we have weather and non-weather related perils that we model on a global level. There's also a database which has been developed, CatDat is its name, continuously since 2003 into the world's largest, most detailed historical catastrophe loss database that's been used in validating all of our models empirically.
And who puts that together, Bijan? Is that a government database? Is it a sort of cooperative database, or
it's a database
university?
Has started even before the Center for Disaster Management, continued its development through the university, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology Center for Disaster Management. And the person who's behind it and has spearheaded it is James Daniel, who has, as I said, been continuously developing it since 2003. But it's been cited by BBC, by the New York Times, various Scientific America, and Nature. So it's an established database that's been used in validating these types of models.
And I guess you also look at stuff like the NOAA stuff from the USA, Copernicus satellite tracking, and all this kind of stuff.
Sure. I mean, that what I mentioned is a loss database, but of course, in building hazard models, you look at all sorts of different input that would come from NOAA. Lots of this data is open. We essentially use open models. We add to it our own vulnerability models, and yeah, we have software then to create models of risk at very high resolution.
Okay, and now a last question, and more about the relationship that we're building together with SunX Malta and our SDG 17 collaboration, where you have kindly agreed that you will be producing for all the people who register their ambitions a kind of a free first go analysis of where people stand. Would you just like to, in closing, talk a little bit about how you see that evolving?
Yeah, I'd love to. And maybe just before I answer that, just provide a little bit of context. Why would a hotel or a tourism business be interested in these types of analytics, right? So for one, I feel tourism businesses are being requested increasingly to disclose their climate risks by investors and insurers. So there's already market forces behind this, which are only getting stronger with time. And especially those needing to reschedule debt repayment plans as the consequences of COVID, investors are looking for transparent disclosure of climate risks. The other big reason I feel companies are interested in these solutions are that without risks, you don't know where to start and where to prioritize various climate mitigation adaptation strategies without understanding and knowing your risks. So we're providing tourism businesses with an assessment, a free assessment of their baseline risk, as well as a go-to library of risk-based solutions, such as how to create a climate resilience plan, investment strategies that look at costs and benefits of different climate resiliency strategies, and so forth. So
yeah, and I guess the other side of this is that pretty soon in many places there's going to be regulations which cover this kind of stuff, particularly, for example, in the EU, where they're focused like hell on this issue.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we're very happy to, be involved in our SDG 17 partnership with SunX, because you're looking at climate friendly travel, and I feel we're very much aligned in the same vision. I see it as two sides of the coin. What is your impact on the climate? What's the climate's impact on you?
Yeah.
And through our baseline assessments that we agreed that we'd provide for free, would essentially be baseline audits that look at anything that, from site conditions to the accommodations building vulnerability, and checks against all the systems and management protocols in place or not in place, and sees how resilient that property is. But it also produces accompanied gap analysis with suggestions on where you might make improvements.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
so you're going to keep being a partner with us, because I like what you've just said.
Yeah, no, I feel that, this is all about, I feel that our partnership can contribute positively towards providing tourism, not just with a way to declare that they're climate resilient or climate friendly, but also for meaningful ways of assessing and communicating those short, mid, and long-term solutions.
And then from my perspective, and this is a great place for us to finish, to act on it, because what I'm reading from all of the IPCC data is we only have a few years to make these changes. Otherwise, the extreme weather is going to just intensify. And so the kind of thing that we hope to do together is to help tourism businesses and tourism communities to prepare for this in their own way, according to their own situation.
Exactly. And you mentioned tourism communities, and I'd just add here that, while we started with the accommodation sector through the Hotel Resilient platform, that's not where we're stopping. Our solutions will engage the entire tourism supply chain and focus on communities at a destination scale, which is what I know is also aligned with your whole vision.
That's great. Well, I'd like to thank you for that, Bijan. I'm really happy that we found each other in the metaverse somewhere and that we put together an agreement. And I'm looking forward to working with you to help make the system better.
Same here. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Take care. Thank you. And now we're going to dig a little deeper with another video from Trevor Girard, who's the Director of Standards at Hotel Resilient. And Trevor, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Jeffrey. My name is Trevor Girard. I'm Director of Standards at Hotel Resilient. And today I'm going to be taking you through what it means for the hotel industry to be resilient and what sort of risks and hazards they should be planning for, especially hotels and hotel managers. So what is resilience? It's really the combination of two lines of thought, although some maybe just stick with this first one, which is the ability to withstand and resist. So that's really, having strong buildings, such as foundations, strong connections to withstand an earthquake, or to have seawalls to protect against a tsunami or storm surge. And this, of course, is important to stop disasters from occurring, from impacting a hotel or any business. But what's also important is the second line of thought, the ability to adapt. So this is seeing that, something is going to happen and quickly changing the way that you're operating or the services that you're being provided as a hotel or as a destination. And as well, to see that some hazards, such as flooding and drought, are changing over the long term. due to climate change. So for that, in that sense, changing the way that that you operate, and again, maybe the services you provide, maybe how you provide those services, and where you do, and so this ability to be strong against hazards, to resist them, but also flexible to change, either as that emergency situation itself is changing, or to change over the long term as these hazards start to become either more pronounced or more dynamic. And so when we're talking about resisting, something, we're really talking about risk. So risk itself, whether it's to risk of an earthquake or flood or some other hazard, that's really made up of three components that combined create risk. So first, you need that hazard in place. So in this picture, it could be something like a typhoon, hurricane. You also need to have to be exposed to it. So a typhoon is obviously not going to impact you if it doesn't make it to where you are. So that exposure is the hotel, a destination, on the coast, exposed to that hazard. And then the hotel and destination also, for it to really impact, if that hazard is really going to impact it, it needs to be vulnerable. And so maybe the structures are not up to code, and so would be vulnerable to an earthquake. Of course, that won't happen if there is no earthquake hazard. So all three of these combined create risk. And there's really a process for managing risk, and this comes from the ISO standards on risk assessment 31,000. And what's very important, of course, is that risk assessment. And the risk assessment answers these questions. So first, what can happen and why? So a tsunami maybe will be able to impact a hotel, the whole beach area surrounding hotel. So that's what can happen and why. Why is that? Is it because that those areas are only 1 meter above sea level? So understanding what can happen and why, and what, of course, are the consequences. So there may be flooding, but that also maybe will knock out power. It maybe will block off some roads in the greater region, depending on the hazard. It could knock out whole transportation systems. The airports could be closed. It could shut down water and sanitation services, electricity, communications, even food and supplies could be cut off. So really understanding the greater, impacts of each individual hazard. And what is the probability of occurrence? And this is really where disaster models come in place. And we also do this with our parent company, RiskLayer. We model these different hazards at a destination level. And what factors then could mitigate or reduce the risk? So maybe an earthquake is likely to occur, but the hotel either has structural bracing or could implement this. And same with flooding. Perhaps there is a seawall, or perhaps a seawall could be put in place. So understanding either what is in place and then needs to be maintained, or what could be put in place to either stop this, the risk of something occurring, or if it cannot be stopped from occurring, at least reducing the impact. And so looking at impact, just for a single hazard, such as a cyclone, can have multiple impacts. You may have, of course, heavy and strong winds, rain. You may have mudslides as soils get saturated. You could have then flooding, which could also lead to knocking out power systems, communications, within the hotel itself, it may be then not able to get any supplies. So within the hotel, there could be no food delivery, no water if that service is knocked out. Even simple things as accessing the rooms. If electric system is knocked out, maybe these key cards won't work anymore, and either rooms will not be able to be accessed, or if they're easily accessed because nothing works, then this could be a security issue. And yeah, airports could be closed, transportation systems. So just multiple impacts from a single hazard. And so this is what hotel then, a destination needs to do, is really understand, okay, for each hazard, what are the potential impacts? And there's many, and some could even lead to others. So a windstorm could lead to a fire if it creates some damage to a electric grid, as well as fire can lead to building collapse. Earthquake could lead to a landslide. So there's really multiple ways that each hazard can either create impacts itself or lead to secondary hazards. And so this is why we really started, and back in 2016 with this project with PATA, with UNDRR, with GIZ and GIDRM, to create these standards that look at multi-hazard and that are really for the globe, for use anywhere in the world. And they are really the only global standards on climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, specifically for hotels. And so they're multi-hazard. They look at all hazards that can take place. We also included pandemics in there, and we have looked at all these hazards with what we call the hotel resilient framework. And so we are always then looking at these three areas for a hotel. So the site, which is taking into account the actual hazards on site, as well as how the building and the building components interact with that hazard to either create a more vulnerable situation or to make it more resilient if it actually is built and located in a way that reduces the risk of that hazard causing impact. And we look at the systems in place, so the emergency systems, fire extinguishers, fire suppression systems, evacuation systems, egress routes, warning systems, and as well as the management policies that are implemented at the hotel. So how that hotel communicates with either the occupants, the guests, or the greater community, or with fire services, police, once they are in an emergency situation, as well as what their preparedness is like. Do they have systems in place, as in like an incident command system to deal with the emergency? And then what are the recovery systems, like getting into business continuity? So if something does impact them, how likely are they, and what do they have in place to build back better, to get back to operating in the quickest way and safest way possible? And so we really take a risk-based approach. And so we, at our parent company RiskLayer, we calculate the risk of for the whole globe for these different hazards, and we provide this as a tool to hotels that they can go into our software and see at their location. After they put in their geographic information, they can see what the risk is, and then it also takes into account some of their building components. And so with that, it's provides hotels with a great place to start. They can see what their risks are before they really start improving their plans. So they understand that they have, in this situation in Baden-Baden in Germany, there is a flood risk. So they know that there's certain mitigation that they can do to prevent against flooding that is more important than, of course, in this case, tsunami risk, which is 0. And so just to take you through some examples of the criteria that are in our standards, and just more in a picture format, so it's maybe quickly easier to comprehend than, line by line text of our standards, just to give you an idea. So starting with the foundation, it's very important to know, especially for earthquake, how strong that structure is. So something on stilts would be a lot more susceptible to an earthquake than a slab on grade construction. Same with the building shape. A more regular footprint is better designed against earthquakes than an asymmetric building. And different building components. So is the, balconies and overhangs properly secured to the structure? Is the roof secured to the walls? Are there coverings of shutters for the windows to prevent against windborne debris damage? And are the windows themselves with safety glass, or if not, then potentially the shards of glass could hurt people in a windstorm or an earthquake. And egress routes, are they well lit? Is there handrails as opposed to unlit, slippery, and dark emergency egress routes? And exit signage as well. Is it consistent? Is it well lit? And does it make sense? The one on the right showing consistent signage that's easy to understand, as opposed to on the left, which could confuse people if a variety of signs are used in the same building. And safe assembly points, are they in place? Are there clear safe assembly points and signage to get to them? And do they accommodate the different types of guests that the hotel will have? And the roles and responsibilities. So does the hotel have a sort of disaster management system? At least, are there clear roles if an emergency occurs? Who should be doing what? It doesn't have to be a full-on disaster management system with a EOC, but still, the staff should be made aware of what it is they need to do if something does occur, and there should be a list of the different tasks that they should be doing, so that they don't have to start making it up and doing it ad hoc as the event occurs, having it on paper. And of course, are those steps and tasks associated to the individual hazard, because they will be different in every hazard. So for an earthquake, there will be different steps that should be occurring, of course, after an earthquake occurs. There'll be different steps, and they'll be taken by the different staff, and this will change for each hazard. So for a typhoon, you'll see it be completely different, because the typhoon you can actually plan for, and so these are more preparedness functions, whereas with an earthquake, it really can only be response. And are there protocols in place to look at that actually address the different hotel areas? So for instance, for evacuating these different areas, it'll change for parking garage to a swimming pool area. And how will you communicate with these areas? Are there speakers everywhere? Will you send staff to those areas? Are there cameras in those areas that you can check to see if there's anyone? So there's different ways of evacuating different areas of a hotel. And similarly, there should be different protocols for different scenarios. So if an earthquake occurs and it's pouring rain outside, will that change people's likelihood to go outside? Will you have to try to enforce that more? Will you need to provide even simply umbrellas or tarps? Will the electric grid be down? And if so, will that affect communications and power and lighting at night, especially? Is there any big event going on, some festival, which you'll have a lot more people on your property who are not necessarily from the hotel? Similarly with a wedding, how will you do it during these types of events or during high tourist season? And so at the end of going through our standards and doing our audit online, the hotel is provided with a audit report that really takes them through and shows them their resilience score, shows them how, their ability to improve their score. There are a number of criteria that every hotel could improve. There are some that they can't, such as hazards. They can't change the actual hazard score of an earthquake, but they could change how they respond and their management system and the different response systems that they have in place, as well as their score for each risk to each hazard. So they can see what is the score, they can see which they should be focusing on. And we feel that's very important, and it creates a great baseline for a hotel to start off in their improvement goal. And finally, just to show you, this is the new PATA resilience framework that we've been working with PATA on a project called Destination Tourism Resilience, where we are developing a set of e-learning for hotels, and there's 10 modules altogether looking at how hotels and how destinations specifically can learn about risk assessments, can learn about how they can improve their capacity to plan for emergencies and to respond accordingly. And in this resilience framework, what's key is that it's really going beyond resilience, although in reality, what it's doing is it's saying that resilience should not just be looking at the ability to adapt and withstand natural hazards, but it should also incorporate sustainability and social responsibility. So together with PATA, we are also saying that for a hotel to be resilient, it should really, it should not only withstand and adapt to hazards, but it should be sustainable in the long term, meaning that it does not impact its environment in a negative way, and in fact should be having a positive impact on the environment. And then, of course, it should be working with the community to ensure that it doesn't have any negative community impacts, and so should be definitely following any kind of policy on, say, on child labor, on forced labor, so to be making sure that it's operating in a way that is being socially responsible.
Well, so much for resilience. Now we're going to drill down a little further and look at one particular critical area, and that is the area of aviation. We're going to first of all look at some challenging questions around aviation framed by The Economist. And then we'll listen to Paul Steele, former corporate secretary at IATA, who has been deeply involved in both delivering semi-critical positions on aviation when he worked with WWF, and in formulating the overall industry position both in IATA and the Air Transport Action Group, which IATA created to bring together a cluster of the entire aviation ecosystem. And the reality is that aviation is a primary driver of much of travel and tourism, of all of intercontinental travel and tourism, of virtually all travel and tourism to small island and to developing states, and to landlocked states, for example, in Africa, where you simply cannot traverse the terrain between countries in order to have a basis for tourism. And a final point I want to leave in your mind, which is really important. Aviation whilst it's much maligned in the media, and I believe has done a pretty bad job of demonstrating this reality, it represents somewhere around just under 3% of global carbon. Very significant, yes, but small in relation to areas like buildings or agriculture or cities, all of which are producing more than 20%. So bear that in mind while you listen to these videos.
Pan American World Airways Clipper Flight 100 nears its destination.
It's an industry that has changed the world, and it's now in crisis. But is this aviation's moment for a green reset?
COVID has given an opportunity to build back green and faster.
The technology race is on.
There's absolutely opportunity for companies like us to change the world here.
But are the runners fit for purpose? And will sustainable air travel cost more? Val Miftakov is the CEO of a company committed to sustainable aviation.
Of course, it's exciting. Every time we're testing something new.
And today, he's test flying a plane that could potentially solve aviation's biggest challenge.
This is the world's largest hydrogen electric aircraft flying right now. Well, we hope for us achieving all the performance that we expect to achieve.
His vision? To fly without polluting the skies.
Okay, let's do it.
134.930. Pacific wind 280.
Okay, let's do the max. What will it do?
In this plane, hydrogen is being used in a fuel cell to run an electric motor, producing zero carbon emissions.
Obviously, the only byproduct of fuel cell operation is water. So water vapor gets out into the atmosphere, and this is pretty harmless.
Without decarbonizing technologies like hydrogen, aviation could be responsible for 22% of the planet's emissions by 2050. Because it can pack more energy into a smaller space, hydrogen has recently overtaken electric batteries as the frontrunner in the race for cleaner flying. Within 15 years, the manufacturing giant Airbus plans to introduce planes that burn hydrogen in engines as fuel. And the EU believes that by 2050, hydrogen technologies could reduce the industry's carbon emissions by up to 75%.
Capital Tower 2, is that only for rejoin?
We actually looked early on at different ways to bring sustainability to aviation. Hydrogen electric is the most efficient and likely to be the lowest cost out of all.
But there are plenty of obstacles to overcome before these hydrogen technologies are commercially viable. For starters, installing the infrastructure to distribute and produce hydrogen will be very pricey, at least $500 billion by one estimate. What's more, hydrogen will need to be produced sustainably, using renewable energy to split water molecules. And on top of that, hydrogen packs less energy into a given volume than jet fuel. So powering long-haul flights will mean extensive aircraft redesign.
So you need bigger tanks, you need to change the shape of the airplane. And then within the engine, you need more sophisticated heat exchangers to deal with the hydrogen coming through.
Airlines are fighting for the future of their industry.
The big problem for aviation is that green technologies cost a lot of money, but there isn't much to go around, as the industry faces the worst economic crisis in its history, and as environmental movements like flight shaming are on the up.
We are peaceful, what are you?
Some in aviation are committed to greener skies. It's just they can't do it on their own. According to one of Britain's leading figures on climate change and energy policy.
I think the good news is that the industry has really redoubled its efforts to decarbonise. I think we are seeing many examples of leadership. But we may also need, government support in an environment where COVID-19 has very clearly hit the cash flows of the big incumbent players in a way which was not their fault.
Even with government's help, it will take at least 2 decades before hydrogen-powered planes are ready for takeoff. To reduce emissions in the nearer term, aviation needs other options. And a frontrunner has recently emerged.
Since July, the right engine of this Airbus A321 has been powered by biofuel.
Sustainable fuels are made from synthetic sources or biological ones such as crops, algae, or even waste.
One of the great benefits of going down the sustainable aviation fuel, the biofuel, or the synthetic jet fuel route is that it's a drop-in fuel so that what happens at the airport doesn't change.
To pump up the flow of sustainable fuels, experts say governments need to offer incentives to airlines. That could mean rolling out taxes on dirty fuels and making airlines buy a certain proportion of cleaner ones.
We have this chicken and egg problem, as we call it, of aviation companies who say, we would love to buy sustainable aviation fuel if it was only 50% more expensive than conventional jet fuel. But as long as it's 3 times more expensive, this is prohibitively expensive. And you have people trying to develop a sustainable aviation fuel technologies who would say, we could get the price down if only we had certainty of really big orders by a particular date.
And there's another way governments could speed up the shift to greener skies. Stumping up investment funds.
So that's interesting.
Just ask the CEO who's trying to make hydrogen-powered planes take off. He says the $3.3 million his company received from the British government has been crucial. He argues larger-scale investment from the state, as well as the private sector, is key to making green aviation viable.
It's very hard to make the radically new technologies competitive commercially without government support right from the beginning, especially when you're in R&D phase, especially in such a capital-intense industry as aviation.
Going green may be the biggest challenge the industry has ever faced. It demands the right investment and policies to support a range of technologies, and that might mean passengers need deeper pockets.
It may be that there is a slight air ticket premium. I think we should simply pay it. I think we should say this is what we have to pay in order to have zero carbon flight.
I'm Simon Wright, industry editor at The Economist. If you'd like to read more about the future of aviation, click on the link opposite. If you'd like to watch more of our Now and Next series, click on the other link. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.
Hi everyone, my name's Paul Steele. I'm an independent consultant, but in my former career, I was the Corporate Secretary and Director of Environment for the International Air Transport Association, the Executive Director of the Air Transport Action Group, and the Chief Operating Officer of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF International. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain to you how the aviation sector is looking towards full decarbonisation by the third quarter of this century. It's an enormous challenge, particularly at the present time, given that the industry has suffered probably the worst crisis in its over 100-year history with the impact of the current COVID pandemic. But nevertheless, the industry continues to work to reduce its impact on the environment, particularly in the realm of CO2 emissions, and we'll explore the plans that they have and look at some of the challenges that the industry is facing in trying to reach that zero carbon goal. The scope of the challenge facing the industry can be clearly seen on this chart from the Air Transport Action Group's Waypoint 2050 report. Despite the impacts of COVID and all the best efforts of the industry to improve fuel efficiency and reduce CO2 emissions, all of the predictions are that without further action, emissions will continue to grow, driven by increases in demand, particularly from developing countries. That is why, way back in 2009, the aviation industry came together and set itself some, what at the time were very ambitious targets. First of all, to improve annual fuel efficiency by 1.5% every year between 2009 and 2020. That may not sound a lot, but that was on top of a 60% improvement that had already been achieved since the beginning of the jet age. The second goal was to stabilize net emissions at the 2020 levels with what was called carbon neutral growth. Even though traffic was forecast to continue to grow, the ambition was to stabilize emissions at the 2020 level. And then looking further forward into the future, the objective was to halve emissions to 50% of the level that they were at in 2005. And for a number of years, these are the targets that the industry has been following. So how is the industry doing? Well, on that first goal of improving fuel efficiency, not bad. This chart shows you the progression every year from 2008 to 2019. And you can see at the bottom right that on average, they've achieved 2% per annum rather than the 1.5% that the industry originally set out to do. And on the medium-term goal, things have not progressed too badly either. Back in 2016, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is the UN body encompassing 192 countries, agreed on the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, known as CORSIA. This aimed to stabilize emissions from 2020 by implementing a basket of measures to reduce emissions, but then to offset any additional growth in emissions above the 2020 level. This has been implemented, and even despite the COVID impacts, it's on course to be implemented and to go into operation as of this year. As far as I'm aware, CORSIA is still the only global agreement for an individual industry sector that's been put in place and is actually being implemented. This means that all of the focus now turns towards trying to achieve the longer term 2050 goal, and of course to try and move as quickly as possible towards a zero carbon future for aviation. The industry has had a 4-pillar strategy, as it's known, in place for a number of years. Those 4 pillars are driving technological development, improving infrastructure to make sure that you reduce delays and reduce fuel burn, improving flying operational techniques, and a market-based measure, which of course was already put in place through CORSIA. Now, of course, the major benefits will come through future technology developments. And of course, this is something that the industry puts a lot of time, effort, and invests a lot of research money into. So moving forward through the middle of the century, we can expect to see some revolutionary technologies starting to appear. But again, is this going to be fast enough in terms of new aircraft or engine designs to really deliver carbon neutrality by the third quarter of this century? You can see the size of the challenge on this slide here. If you look at everything below the thick blue line, that is what needs to be done in order to reach the industry's original target of half the 2005 level of emissions by 2050. That's a combination of CORSIA, which is the purple piece in the middle, and technology, operational infrastructure improvements, as we can see. But also, there's a large component of alternative fuel that needs to come into play. So we will start to see some of those revolutionary aircraft and engine designs coming into the fleet in around 2035 or 2040. But again, that won't be enough to deliver carbon neutrality by the third quarter of the century. So the focus is moving more and more towards looking at alternative fuels for aviation. The challenge that we have is that jet kerosene, derived from fossil fuels, is a perfect fuel for aviation. It doesn't freeze at low temperature, it doesn't ignite at high temperature, It's light and it has a very high energy ratio. It's the perfect fuel if you're trying to fly around the world. But increasingly, there's more and more focus on looking at alternative fuels for aviation. And two of the most exciting here are hydrogen and, in the short to medium term, sustainable alternative fuels made from largely waste products. These types of fuels derived from waste products shouldn't be confused with the original types of biofuels that were produced from crops and therefore had all sorts of issues in terms of land use and water resource use, etc. Most of the fuels that have been developed for use in aviation have been derived from household waste or industrial waste, and it looks like that is a huge opportunity going forward. The great news is that all of the hard technical development and safety testing has been done, and we know that we can mix these fuels with existing kerosene, so as they become available we can add more and more into the tanks of aircraft. There are now 6 approved different pathways for producing sustainable aviation fuel, and there are no changes that are needed to the aircraft or the engines when you're using this fuel. So it really is a very, very exciting opportunity. Already well over 300,000 flights have taken place with a mix of these types of fuels, so it is tried and tested. The challenge now, of course, is scaling up from what has been laboratory level production up to full industrial scale of production and distribution of these fuels. The great news is that things are really starting to move. There are a number of plants being built at scale around the world, and there are more and more of these being announced all the time, driven largely by partnerships between completely new fuel suppliers and individual airlines. This is certainly very encouraging, but is it developing fast enough to really enable the industry to even think about zero carbon by the third quarter of the century? Unfortunately, probably not. The biggest single factor slowing down the future growth and potential of sustainable alternative fuels for aviation is a lack of government policy, coherent government policy. Many governments around the world have been very slow to recognise the opportunity that alternative fuels for aviation will provide. We need governments to think holistically so that they're able to converge their energy, climate and transport policies, and then they would see that alternative fuels for aviation are a no-brainer. Unfortunately, achieving this type of forward thinking is difficult even at a national level, let alone internationally, which is what is going to be needed for a truly global industry like aviation. So governments need a nudge, and this is where people like Professor Jeffrey Lippman come into play. Jeffrey has promoted what he's called moonshot thinking, saying we should have a moonshot. We should do what John Kennedy did when he said, "I want to put a man on the moon." We need visionaries like Jeffrey to help nudge people forward, to bring financial institutions, manufacturers, scientists and governments together so that they can think big and we can fully exploit this opportunity of sustainable alternative fuels for aviation that are available now. It's really just a question of scaling up, because if we are able to deliver on this, then we can secure more or less a zero carbon future for the aviation sector by the third quarter of this century. That's an amazing opportunity.
And to put things in context, we're also going to show you a video of the EU's latest initiative in this field, which is called Refuel EU. And again, it will be the determinant factor under which we all operate here in Europe. in fairness, Paul Steele's video, which talked about achieving net zero in the third quarter of the century, excuse me, was made a year and a half ago. After the recent IATA general meeting in Doha, and in anticipation of a major ICAO assembly in Montreal in September, the IATA position has moved very much into the mainstream. Let's take a look at one of the several social media videos they've now put out on their 2050 ambition.
Flying is freedom. It connects us with the places, people and things we love. But this comes at a cost to the environment that will grow as more people in all parts of the world take to the air. That's why the world's airlines have committed to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050. To get there, we have a bold plan that involves using sustainable fuels and radical technologies, aided by flight efficiencies and offsetting. It's a plan that needs industry and governments to work closely together. Sustainable aviation fuels, or SAFs, are the foundation of our strategy. Because they absorb carbon as they are made, SAFs cut net emissions by 80%. SAFs can come from plants, recycled cooking oil, household waste and renewable energy. We are going to increase the amount of SAFs we use to around 450 billion litres by 2050, eliminating 65% of our CO2. It will be a fuel revolution. And as we have seen with the switch to solar and wind for electricity, when everyone works together, change can happen fast. The most exciting development is a zero emissions plane that will require new electric or hydrogen propulsion designs. These are already on the drawing board, but will take time to enter the fleet. From about 2035, we will start to see these planes on short-haul flights. By 2050, they could be eliminating 13% of our CO2. We will be continuing to improve efficiencies in operations and infrastructure, like flying more direct air traffic control routes. And any remaining emissions will be removed by investing in offsetting and carbon capture technology, which sucks carbon out of the air and stores it or turns it into something useful. Our plan for net zero also offers a realistic opportunity to boost the green economy with new jobs and technologies, while improving energy security and strengthening air connectivity. And travellers will know that each flight they take will be progressively more sustainable as we approach a net zero future.
And before we close today, I want to play you a presentation of one of Sunex Malta's SDG 17 partners, Tomorrow's Air. And in saying this, I want to be clear that we are not taking, at this moment, a firm position on the question of net. I personally believe there's a lot of smoke and mirrors behind this concept, but it was the agreed position at COP26 by most of the countries who were there. It was certainly a central plank of the Glasgow Declaration. And of course, it's easy to get people to get behind something which may allow you to continue doing business as usual. And because we live in today's world, we understand there's a huge movement around this direction of net zero and the use of carbon offsets. But there is also a lot of criticism coming. You heard Daniel Scott and Susan Beckham particularly mention academic concerns around offsetting issues and whether you're really reducing your emissions or you're increasing your emissions and paying somebody else to reduce their emissions. And I've described it elsewhere, and I think I did early on this course, as the man who commits to give up smoking and then continues to smoke, but pays somebody else in another country or continent to stop smoking. And that's the sort of philosophical issue that we have to look at. But we have a couple of SDG 17 partners who are operating in the world of offsets. One of them is you're going to see now is Tomorrow's Air, which uses carbon capture, which is an interesting concept and comes from the Adventure Travel Trade Association, basically a 10,000 strong group of eco travelers. And they've set up a company which they believe is designed to help them reduce the impacts of their travel, and they've made it available to everybody. And we have a second partner called Trees for Travel, who are planting trees, particularly for air passengers, and they're seeking to do it in areas which are gold standard projects. One of the big question marks around offsets is you can plant trees and then a forest fire can come along and they can all be burned down. And so you don't have any capacity for reducing the carbon that you actually said you were going to do. And when you look at how the forest fires are increasing, this is a kind of issue of concern. Or tree planting can take place in land which was designed or could have been used for feeding people. And that's another question as to whether you're really creating a net benefit or not. But these are all issues that you will have to grapple with individually. I am personally coming down on the side that says, and we made a policy position for this at Sunex Malta that says, okay, you've agreed to go net, do it to 2030. You've got 10 years to plan how to go real reduction and not rely on the net factor. So let's have a look now at Christina Beckman and Tomorrow's Air.
My name is Christina Beckman. I am very happy to be here today to share an introduction to Tomorrow's Air. So the last many years I've been focused on tourism. I'm the Vice President for Global Strategy at the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And I'm also a co-founder at Tomorrow's Air. And this is my son, Jack. I include him here because, you know, when we sort of take away, when we strip everything away, what's the reason for our work? Why are we working? Why are we working in climate? Why do you care about climate? Tomorrow's Air was born in Antarctica. I had the extreme good fortune to be there in 2018 on an expedition that brought together scientists and activists, also artists, business people, on an expedition focused on climate learning and on networking. The idea was you're here, you're learning, you're having this incredible experience of a very pristine and distinctive place, and experiencing firsthand what it means to contemplate the melting of all this ice, what that does to the world. I'm wearing this 2041 hat. That is also really significant. That's the year the Antarctic Treaty expires or comes up for renegotiation. This has been a deep passion of Robert Swan. He is the first person to walk to the North and South Poles. He says the first person stupid enough to do that. He's made it his life's mission to activate a global climate core. And he's certainly done that. It was on this expedition where I met Nim de Swart, my co-founder. She is based in Australia. So we launched Tomorrow's Air in July of 2020 in kind of the peak of the pandemic. We'd been laying the groundwork for it well before that, however, so that allowed us to go forward despite the pandemic. So one of the, the big learnings for me in recent years has been the understanding that we now have so much carbon dioxide stored in our atmosphere that even if all emissions stop today, if everything just magically halted, it would still take hundreds to thousands of years for our natural systems to process all that CO2. So we know now that this climate crisis is so present that inaction is actually detrimental to businesses. This slide is talking about destinations. But if you're a business, it's not just like something that you think is nice to have anymore. It's necessary, and you can't kick the can down the street anymore. But it's also a great opportunity, and it's engaging in meaningful climate action it can feel like a burden, or you can spin it around and see it as an incredible opportunity. And in travel and tourism, we certainly do have an incredible opportunity. I'll say more about that, but as travelers, as businesses, we are on top of an awesome moment, a moment for leadership and positive change. So I'll share more. So here's our vision. We imagine a world where consumers are empowered and confident in taking meaningful action for their planet's future, for climate, where corporate communities are likewise enabled to empower a climate conscious community, and where ultimately the carbon impacts of travel could be automatically accounted for and embedded into all products, benefiting all of society. So we see ourselves as at the start of a journey to catalyze a carbon-free travel ecosystem. So where we are today, we are educating and mobilizing a global collective to remove and permanently store travel's contribution of carbon dioxide emissions. And that global collective then, as you might imagine, includes travelers, businesses, and destinations, as well as businesses. So not just tourism experience providers, but anyone who sells products and services in travel has a role to play here. We are incubated by the Adventure Travel Trade Association. As I mentioned, I'm a vice president there focused on strategy. The ATTA is the largest network for adventure travel. We have nearly 30,000 individuals representing businesses, tourism boards, media, and guides, a very, very values-driven organization. We've always had sustainability at the heart. The entrepreneurs in our community establish their businesses in many cases to promote conservation, to celebrate local cultures. They have that motivation at the core of their business. Well, Tomorrow's Air is a new brand within the ATTA, and we're leveraging the sterling reputation of this community, as well as the passion of this community, to help get liftoff for carbon removal. So we saw a problem. I'm sure you've all seen this problem. Travel lacks a unified approach to meaningful climate action. We know that we are a significant contributor to carbon dioxide emissions, 8%. And while many different entities are generating these emissions, we don't have one place that serves the cleanup of all these emissions. Travelers, of course, are sort of at the heart of the system, but really don't have a whole lot of leverage in terms of driving impact. So it appears that we need a place to come together. We also noticed that government-led and corporate climate strategies have not matured quick enough with the intensity of the climate crisis. So there is certainly a whole portfolio of carbon mitigation options available. You may have heard and are familiar with different kinds of offsets: forestry offsets, renewable energy, regenerative agriculture. All these things have many benefits for climate and co-benefits for people. However, they cannot solve this problem alone. And now we know that we need more, we need to incorporate some innovative climate actions as well. So for example, as I'm very focused on, solutions that provide permanent carbon dioxide storage and can accelerate the pace at which we are cleaning up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. I want to talk a little bit here about carbon removal. There are so many terms in this category, and it's very easy to get muddled and confused, especially if your day-to-day life is not focused on it. So carbon removal is any technique that takes carbon out of the air and stores it. And one way to understand the range of options is to differentiate them based on their carbon dioxide storage capabilities. So on the one side of this chart, you see the image of the wind generators, renewable clean cook stoves. Renewable energy and clean cook stoves are helpful. Of course, they're better than fossil fuel burning mechanisms, but they don't offer any carbon storage. They're not really taking carbon out of the atmosphere and helping us solve this problem of stored CO2. Organic farming is terrific, and we do store CO2 in soil, definitely. This is short-lived and also hard to quantify precisely. There are many other reasons to engage in organic farming, not just the climate impacts. So I'm in favor of all of these things. I'm sort of setting the stage, though, that when it comes to solving climate and handling this excess CO2 in the atmosphere, we need more than just these mechanisms. So trees, I want to talk a little bit about protecting trees. Afforestation, reforestation, protecting forested areas. This is so powerful and so important. Trees absorb and store carbon. I read something that, mature forests in an old growth mature tree, you're looking at carbon storage can be 500 years. This is very, very powerful. Also, we know, of course, that trees require protection. They require political will. And as we live in a warmed world already, we do lose forests every year to wildfires. I live here in California, and this is, if you've watched the news, you know that, or Australia, where our co-founder Nim is from, we know that fires are consuming a lot of our forests. So another wonderful thing to include when we're thinking about ways to restore our climate, and also not a full solution. So now we get to the end of the row here, where we think about carbon removal using negative emissions technologies such as direct air capture. I'll talk more in depth about how direct air capture works. In this context, the thing to understand is that carbon removed from the atmosphere through direct air capture can be permanently stored underground in basaltic rock formations. So that is sort of the portfolio of options that we can be thinking about, should be thinking about when we're thinking of taking climate action. So Tomorrow's Air then offers affordable carbon removal with permanent storage. We offer this to individuals, to companies and destinations, and a key piece of how we pull all this together and are growing the community is through accessible and fun inspiration and education. So for example, we have an online virtual experience called Pull Carbon Dioxide from the Air, where you can take a virtual tour of Climeworks, and I'm going to say more about them, of their pilot facility in Hinwil, Switzerland. They have now a larger facility running on geothermal energy outside of Reykjavik in Iceland. But this pilot plant you can see in Hinwil, and Anna climbs all around it. We field questions from people all over the world. This is an example of the kind of climate education and climate action education we think is going to really help build us towards faster results. There's only so many among us who can really tuck into an IPCC report and really know what to do with that. So we are trying to bring about a more accessible way to understand climate action. So Tomorrow's Air also includes a curated community of travel benefits providers. So when you subscribe as an individual member, you remove CO2 and you also gain access to special savings, special offers from this curated community of sustainable travel providers. So this, I think, is a really interesting from the perspective of motivation. We know that humans have a hard time planning or making decisions that are for benefits that are well off in the future. And even though climate is such an existential crisis, we still have a hard time making the moves that we need when the benefits are in the future. So the benefits community we've put together on Tomorrow's Air gives travelers and companies some immediate benefits. So if you're a traveler, you're also getting the immediate benefit of access to a curated set of products and services that hopefully you find desirable. If you are a business, you get the chance to market yourself towards high-value consumers, who hopefully are interested in your products and will transact with you because you are part of this community, because they share your values, they like that you're removing CO2, and they like, of course, receiving some savings today. So this aspect of Tomorrow's Air is nascent at the moment, but we're building this and we see this as an important component of the overall vision. Let me talk briefly about the carbon removal technology that powers Tomorrow's Air. Our partner in this is Climeworks. They are the leading carbon removal provider. It's a Swiss company, as I mentioned. So the way this works, carbon collectors, they're the size of a small car. They pull air in through a fan. There's a highly selective filter material within the collector. The carbon dioxide molecules adhere to that. Everything else passes out. Once that filter is saturated, they close the collector and turn up the heat, and pure concentrated CO2 is released from the filter. And then, because we had all this conversation about storage, and then we store it. So this graphic here shows you the facility, and then what happens with that pure CO2 is it's mixed with water and then injected deep underground into basaltic rock formations. You can see this drill core that one of my friends is holding in his hand. We had the Climeworks guys at an Adventure Travel Trade Association World Summit in 2019. They brought this core. Those little white flecks are the crystallized carbon dioxide. You might also be asking at this point, oh, it sounds like you're using a lot of energy to power these machines. Are you confident that you are removing more CO2 than you're generating? And yes, we certainly are. This is powered by geothermal energy in Iceland, and it's been tested and audited. It's 90% efficient. So much, much more CO2 is being captured than is being generated in the process. I want to point out that this method is measurable and totally transparent. So through this partnership, we can measure the entire process through a flow meter. This is really helpful, especially at this stage, I think, in the evolution of business and consumer acceptance of climate action methods, because there has been confusion around different kinds of carbon offsetting, because we have had bad actors when it comes to certain solutions that people have paid money for in good faith. There's, with a tree, it can be hard to judge how much CO2 is being stored within that tree and for how long. This is not a knock on trees. I'm an incredible fan of trees. This is just acknowledging that this is sort of a different opportunity that we have here. So ultimately, we'd like to see investment in nature-based solutions and technological solutions, such as we're offering here, as part of an overall portfolio to help restore our climate. We leverage travel and art and storytelling. So a key piece of our strategy, I've sort of explained the platform and how people can engage. Travelers can purchase subscriptions, memberships, companies and destinations can partner with us for larger CO2 removal and broader educational campaigns. One of the ways that we are promoting our messaging is really take advantage of the inspiration and the passion that travelers have and that we all have for exploration. So we are embedding climate and carbon removal messages along with travel marketing. And we also have this component called Artists for Air. We are growing a global community of artists, graphic artists, and photographers and videographers. I was just speaking recently with a performance artist, anyone who is in the art world and is willing to align their work with a carbon removal message. Art really gives us a visual language, an emotional way of processing climate messages. So that's a really important piece of our strategy is building out our Artists for Air and being creative with the education. So our stories are also amplified through the Adventure Travel Trade Association. If you're a business or a destination, this can be a powerful benefit also to participating in Tomorrow's Air. ATTA is a very established organization, multiple channels. Adventure.travel is also in there that speaks to adventure travelers. I encourage you to look up the Adventure Travel Trade Association and find them on social. Let's see what else I have. Stuck. All right. Oh, I'm bragging here. I'm sharing some press. So I think from a traveler perspective or a business perspective, you could say that the moment we're sort of in a very frothy moment where travelers are craving climate solutions. There was a global study you might have seen through the UNDP. It was the largest survey ever done. I think they had 1.2 million respondents, where more than half of global respondents said climate was a top concern. We are really proud to have reputable outlets like National Geographic and the New York Times spotlighting our offering. We also recently won the visionary category of Newsweek's Future of Travel Awards. So while it might have felt a little bit radical in the recent past to be convening a collective for climate and for carbon removal, it is actually feeling like something that is inevitable and is asked for. So finally, in closing, we are uniting consumers and trade. We're providing tangible and measurable carbon removal with permanent storage. We have an offering specific for travelers, uniting technology along with travel and storytelling style education. At the heart of this is amplifying the actions of an individual. Carbon removal with permanent storage is expensive right now. As the demand increases, as we deploy more of this technology, its efficiencies will increase and its costs will come down. No single entity could solve this on their own. We really do all have to come together to chip in. And that's it. When we band together, we are powerful.
And to give a little bit of equal time, not quite equal, but at least some exposure to another SDG 17 partner we have in this area, who have a completely different approach to offsetting and whose promotional video very much takes you into the marketing world, which of course is the world that you as NTOs know so well. So that should round us off for today. And again, I'm going to ask you, please participate in the discussion. It's very important that we get the feedback for how you as NTOs are looking at the issues that we share with you. And be critical if you want to be. Better if you be nice, but be critical, and let's have a thoughtful exchange on these issues. Thank you.